primary interest is development of neuropsychological tests managing the population, particularly cultural and educational effects of neuropsychological profiles of violence in antisocial individuals, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and schizophrenia. She's published very widely. She's received several awards and is a member of national and international scientific committees. It's a huge honor for us to have her here at UCL. That's what Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the organizers. This is a huge effort, and I'm really honored to be here with you. And so I'm going to talk for a fine line of research that I think is really relevant, especially in these years in Mexico. As you know, the road is a tool that humans use for different purposes, like it's like sports, like for constructions or communications. As we use the rope, we have developed different knots that usually we use for union of things. But the history of a person can make that instead of using the rope for communication, that we use it for destruction. And this is one of the cases that I have been studying. And her name is Juana Barraza Samperio. She's well known as La Matavecita. She's accused of killing more than 18 women and attempting to kill 2 others. And she currently has 750 years of she's in a jail for 755 years. So she used, as I said, she's a natural victim. She used the cords and ropes to choke the victims. And she's a serial killer because the serial killer has to have a direct contact with the victim and to kill more than 3 with an interval. So this is an actual case that she killed. Since 1994, I have been studying different criminal offenders that are part of the jail system in Mexico. So I have people from narco traffic organizers, and I have serial killers like Juana Barraza that I study here deeply. And so one of the questions of my research is what causes violent behavior? Are there critical periods where we can intervene so we can stop that criminal behavior? What are the key issues that preventive programs should include? And if this preventive program should be directed toward working with the children, with the caregivers, with the social group, or if through the study of criminal brain can we have an effect on the moral development of children. So one of the big questions is what causes prosocial violent behavior? And I think more important is that how can we raise children with moral integrity? Because that's a prevalent question in both family and social environments, is how to raise people who are honest and self-controlled and in such a complex and morally ambiguous world, especially if we consider that there's a fragile bond between the family, the school, and the community, especially in Mexico. Antisocial behavior can cause great suffering, and that can range from minor actions like cheating over friends, doing board games, to a major crime such as robbing and killing others in cold blood. From the brain point of view, neuropsychological studies have found that certain areas of the brain, like the frontal lobe, and especially when there's damage or when there's a premature brain development, can impact negatively the prosocial behavior. And we know that early traumatic experience like traumatic events, formal education, in daily interpersonal relationships can alter the frontal lobe development which in turn is associated with emotions and moral behavior. We know from the study of children that certain characteristics that lie on the foundation of moral behavior apparently are inherent to our species, but others need to be acquired. So we are born with some separate traits that make us have empathy and connect to others, but there are other things that have to be acquired. And we know, for example, from the classic studies of Robert Nelsack, that a number of inborn responses predispose the human being to act in ethical ways, and that, for example, empathy is part of our native endowments. If you see newborns, they cry when they hear the others cry, and they show signs of pleasure at happy sounds such as food and laughter. So one of the questions the psychology have asked for a long time is, what factors contribute to a full development of moral integrity? And although some theories within the behavioral arena emphasize that we should reward ethical acts and punish non-ethical acts, and it's a useful techniques for building character, the result of these studies is that the individuals, it's necessary that individuals internalize the good behavior and the bad behavior, and not just being punished, not by just using punish and reward. Because if you just use punish and reward, you get in the risk that people will avoid dishonest behavior when there's a risk to be caught. And so other people emphasize that you should teach values and just teach them. But however, just teaching like the theory of values is not enough either. I was interviewed this hitman. I always emphasize that this is a hitman and this is my student. So he was telling me, I said, how many people did you kill? And he said, well, 30. And so I asked him, did you rape them also? And he was really offended. I said, how dare you? I said, why? Because I have values, doctor. So I think just teaching a value is not enough, because just to know that you should not rob, nor kill, nor cause damage, you need to say, I will not do that. I will not rob. It's not just like we have to internalize those values. So as I mentioned, violent behaviors are alarmingly common in our society and are considered now a public health problem. And they range from domestic violence to street crimes. And one of the questions that we want to answer is what moves human beings to hurt others, including relatives or strangers, and can these impulses and actions be prevented or controlled? So in an effort to fight this tendency, there has been an increased research aimed at understanding the causes of violent behavior and the development of efficient treatments. So some of the questions that neuroscience tries to answer is how an adaptive behavior like aggression can turn into violent behavior. So we know there's a difference between aggression and violence. Aggression, for example, it's an innate biological response, a trait selected by nature for its biological advantage. You can imagine a wolf that cannot defend his offspring, so you need to have aggression to defend yourself. You have a biological system to do that. But violence, it's a different thing. It's an aggression that has the intention to damage others physically or psychologically, and it doesn't have a purpose of survival. And it's an aggression that it's hypertrophy, and so it doesn't have a biological purpose. So, one of the questions is the prevention of crime. Why, how, and what generates violent individuals in order to be able to do them? So I have been published a few books related to this issue and several scientific papers. And this is another one that I wrote with a philosopher who how do you choose? Do you choose to be evil when you are a criminal behavior? So I have been studying more than 340 inmates and people who are really violent. It's not just inmates. So where did I pick them up? I pick them from state prisons. I go to high security prisons, like the one that Chapo escaped recently. I didn't interview him, but I interviewed several of the members of his organization, of the Cartel of Sinaloa Pacifico. So I have good information. And I also studied violent individuals who are husbands, who are really violent, and police, judicial police, right? So violence is not a simple issue. It's related to several factors, like individual risk factor that I'm going to talk about, your genetic makeup has to do with that. There are also risk factors related to familiar and group forces, and it's also a social risk factor. So when these three variables interact, then you will have very violent people. So what I have been studying is to try to see what are these different factors that produce these really violent people. So we know from the psychiatrist point of view, there's primary violence and then secondary violence. In secondary violence, we talk that without being aware, certain individuals can present violent behaviors which are product of other alterations like depression, like a personality disorder, like borderline personalities, traumatic brain injury, and that environmental factors can make violence worse. So this is secondary violence. I'm not interested in secondary violence. In order for me to study these people, I try to exclude all these factors like borderline personality, depression, traumatic brain injury. So I'm interested in studying primary violence, the really, really bad guys and women. And when you're talking about primary violence, you are talking about, you can classify as antisocial personality disorders or as psychopaths. And although some people confuse these two groups, they are different. One is, so who are they? In this book that I wrote, we thought that we had to talk about psychopathy and sociopathy. In psychopathy, it has a genetic component which interacts with the environment. In sociopathy, it's an acquired component. And you talk about neuronal sociopathy, but also about cultural sociopathy, and that's an acquired problem. When we talk about psychopathy, it's really a personality disorder that affects three areas, like interpersonal relationships with people with excessive sense of self-value, they are superficial and charming, they're easily liars, and they are manipulative. In the area of affectivity, they lack the ability to feel emotions, therefore they do not empathize and they don't feel guilt. And behaviorally, they are irresponsible, impulsive, they do not have goals, and have parasitical relations with others. How many psychopathies are? Like literature will say there are between 1% and 3% of the population. It's a personality disorder. And in Mexico, we will talk about around 1 million Mexicans who could be psychopaths. And we made a study within the jail system, and there are like 20% of psychopaths. Not all the people who are in the jail system are psychopaths, but they are more than in the normal population. So yes, we are surrounded by many psychopaths, especially in Mexico, especially politicians. And really like all these very financial good guys, they're really frequent, some of them. When we talk about neuronals and sociopathy, we found that when there's damage in the frontal lobe, especially in the orbitofrontal area, that can be caused by lesions, by tumors, or injury, it really affects the capacity to perceive pain and the suffering from others. So that's neuronal sociopathy. But unfortunately, what we're having in Mexico and in South America is cultural sociopathy. And that's it's acquired from experience that have forced the individual to change their lifestyle For example, children that join organized crime. So we have the niños sicarios, the niños who are hitmen. And this new environment leads them to lose the capacity for empathy. They have the empathy, but they lose it. And they don't respond empathically to others, and they even provoke injury, inflict injury to others. And this is another person that I studied. Her name is Edgar Jimenez Lugo, and her name is El Ponchis. And he's a boy who was born from immigrants, illegal immigrants from Cuernavaca, who went to San Diego. And there, the father was addicted to cocaine, and the mother was also addicted to cocaine. And when Ponchis was born, he was born with an addiction to cocaine. So the social system, the foster system of San Diego said he's an immigrant, so they sent him to Cuernavaca back with the grandmother. And he stayed there with the grandmother, but then the mother died. So he stayed in the streets of Cuernavaca, where some people who worked for selling drugs, they were part of the cartel of the Gran Neiva, they said, come on and work with us. So they embraced him. That's the sister who was a lover of one of the members of the cartel. So then he started to kill people since he was 11. So he even videotaped, put the YouTube video so he could show how bad he was and how he could damage everybody. So that's a big problem that we're having, because now we have lots of young people in Mexico who put in the social media how they're using guns and how do they keep this type of guns like this. And how to kidnap people, and they say how they rob them and kidnap. And these young people usually join gangs, and the gangs are the ones who not the organized crime just pick them up, and they use them for all these dirty things that they have to do. They give them a lot of money, and this is another guy that I saw. So we are having, in Mexico, we have these, the demographers will say, oh, we have this huge opportunity. We're full of young people where we can use this huge force, not like Europe, that don't have so many young people, so they will save society because it's like a good force to save. But the problem is that we have more than 70 million of young people who don't study, no work, and this is a book that came since The Voice of Nobody. So those are the guys who are getting incorporated in these stories. So as I told you, I am interested in studying what's the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths. So we have been studying normal controls and then psychopaths and sociopaths and see what the difference in their brain. And what we do is we study emotions, we provoke emotions then. We do neuropsychological testing, we do electrophysiology, event-related potential. In some cases, I am able to take them out, which are neuroimaging, functional MRI. We also start making genetic testing. Then I don't do it, I take a sample, but I work with very good geneticians in Mexico. And we also study the social history. How would their race and the history of sexual abuse. So the neuroimaging, we do functional MRI, and we want to see what happened when they process fear emotions. Do they feel fear? What areas of the brain activated when they're doing that? And we have a battery of visual images. They are like pleasure stimuli and unpleasant stimuli without moral content, and then we have unpleasant stimuli with moral content. We have children and old people who are feeding and women who are feeding, and then neutral stimuli. And this is a neutral stimulus. Unless you have some fetiches or retones, we did that study that we found. So what we find when we do this is really interesting, because there are structures that are different between psychopaths and the very mind people and the control people. One of the structures that we found is the amygdala. it's a subcortical culture structure that's related to fear processing. And the amygdala is very important for social conditioning. Um, and we also find difference in the orbitofrontal cortex. And it's the story that I told you before, the frontal lobe are very important, and the orbitofrontal cortex is very important for attaching emotion to decision making. When you take decisions, the emotion has to be there. And then there's another area that can be very interesting is the angular gyrus. The angular gyrus, it has to do with the structure that it's matured very late, like at 7 years old, and it has to do with the ability to learn how to read and write, to integrate stimuli. And then we also study, we make also, we study with tractography, the connection between the areas of the brain. So the areas that produce emotions have to be connected to the areas that regulate. So we were studying the consonant fasciculus, which connects these two areas. So we make these fMRI studies, and we also do electrophysiological studies. Different types of stimulus against a control subject. And we also have a battery where we provoke to detect psychopathy that is related to congruent and incongruent stimuli. So for example, we provoke to detect psychopathy is really difficult because they are liars. So they say, oh, I'm so nice, such a good person. And they're really charming. So we have these measures of event-related potentials when we put like two stimulus. It's good to kill, it's nice to torture, and we control the words. Okay, and then we put incongruent stimuli like it's that's incongruent, and the congruent is it's good to forgive, it's nice to take care of somebody else, and so we check what's going on in the brain when we do that, and we also do. So this is, for example, this is when you have incongruent stimuli, like it's bad to kill, we do generate an N400 wave that's related to semantic processing. And this is the subject that we use to dissolve the bodies. It's a Pozolero. And he doesn't have any of these incongruent. For him, it was nice to kill, nice to dissolve character, bodies and that. We also have a battery to detect pedophiles. And also to detect a pedophile is very difficult because they always say, oh, I'm just taking care for the little girl or the little boy, I'm not doing anything. So we also have these congruent and incongruent stimuli, sex with children or sex with adults. And this is the normal way. This is an abnormal, the N400 effect, and this is the way for a pedophile. So I'm not saying that these are the only tests that you should do, because it's a very important decision, but it could help as part of the whole story of these people. So this is the N400 effect, which is related to parietal occipital lobes, where you generate that, and this is the in psychopaths that they don't generate these waves. So we also use neuropsychological batteries. These batteries have been developed in Mexico and standardized in the Mexican populations. And we have found also very important difference, especially in between psychopaths and non-psychopaths in the orbitofrontal lobe. So I'm trying to tell you that I've used several measures to check what areas of the brain are intact and which areas of the brain are not functioning. So when you have damage to the orbitofrontal area, you have demand for immediate gratification, you have absence of fear and punishment, they are not constrained by social costumes, there's deterioration of intuition, and there's deterioration of impulse control. So we also went to see what's happened with the genes. You know that there's not a gene for good or bad behavior, but you can generate like this killer mouse if you modify certain genes that related to the production. Genes, what they do is regulate the enzyme that regulate how much neurotransmitter has to be in the synaptic place. So you can modify the ribosome to have killer mouse. And so we went to check what's going on with these guys. So we had 80 examples of the interns, and we found a very interesting effect that In humans, it's also, you have the gene, and you have these abnormal, these polymorphisms, but this gene will be activated only when there's a history of child abuse, physically or psychologically. So this is a paper that we published, and we found that we studied how they were raised, if they had a history of traumatic events, if they were witness to a lot of violence or to violations. And we found that we separated between psychopaths, high psychopathy, lower, medium psychopathy, and low psychopathy. And we found that the higher the history of stress, like physical abuse or emotional abuse, or even being present in sexual abuse of somebody, that will be related to the level of psychopathy. So you were more psychopath if you had a high history of this social abuse. So I have, then some people from France wrote to me and they said, you have to see what we're doing. So they sent me some things. So they found that if you stress rats, when, let me just see how that, so you can stress the rats in the lab. Oh, no, this is not the one. So you can, if you stress the rats, especially in the very early stage, before they reach adolescence, and you can stress the rats by putting them into the 4 swimming class, which I'm trying to show you. So you put the 4 rats here. But it's interesting that if you do it before they reach adolescence, so you are forcing them to, so Fortivan just told me that he's a very expert in that, in stressing little rats and torture the speakers. So it's interesting because los hablamos. Es el no, okay, so you can stress them like that. So they feel that they're gonna. And what happened is when these stress rats, they grow, they become really. I want to show you what happened with this. So if you put like in the stress rats that you stress in the beginning, if you put like the glove, so you put the glove and they become really aggressive when they're, see? And in the non-stress rats, you can just touch them and they explore the glove. Well, that's not the important part, which is really shocking, is that the offspring of these rats during 3 generations would be exactly like 3 generations of rats like that. And we did that, they didn't see the father doing these stressful things, no? They were not stressed or anything like that. So, yeah, during 3 generations, that would happen. And that's really very important for what we are seeing. Genetic, I'm not a genetician, with my drawing of the stress and not stress. But how is this working? The new theories of genetics, I probably people know more than me. They know that it's not a change in the genetic makeup, but it's that the histones, it's like proteins that are around the genetic, the genes, are able to control where the genes will be expressed and switch on. So when the rats are stressed, that will change the histones and the cells. So you have this stress, you have these genes of violence, but they will not be activated with distress, then the stones will open and will make that you can express these genes. And so I think that's really important, and we have to do something. So in relation to the individual risk factors and the familiar risk factors, there's also social factors that affect if you are, how the subject is related to his environment. In Mexico, we have this problem that the government is not protecting us. And here we have in Tepito, which I work in, so it said, advertencia, ratero que agarremos en la madre le daremos, which I translated into English. It sounds really worse in Spanish. So people are really getting they're living in a very aggressive communities, and the government is just building new jails, and more people to the jails, which the jails is really a bad system for the adaptation, just a school of violence, and so they put on people. And then we have social media where you can really get into tutoring how to do bullying to other people through the internet, and we have lots of violence through the social media. And that in a brain that is developing, it's really not helping to build this social and moral identity. So one of the questions that said what we should do, and we know this that we're finding with either critical periods. In the story of the people that I interview and that I study, they start to say that they have problems that they were not. They have behavioral problems. They were like positive discipline behaviors, and that's related usually to the amygdala. The amygdala is the structure that is good for conditioning, for social conditioning. It's for fear conditioning. If you don't have fear that your mother is not going to love you, or your mother or your parents are not going to praise or reward or punish your reward, if you are not scared, then it's very difficult to be socialized. And what we saw in the studies with when they were processing fear, the psychopaths, the amygdala was less activated and it was smaller, really smaller. So it's interesting. We published that in a very important journal in the US, Scan, about that results. So that structure is related to social behavior. And then I mentioned that the ambulus gyrus, which is very important for learning, for reading, it's also not well developed. So they have usually learning problems in school. So they start to fail at school, not because they're dumb, it's because that area is very important for reading and writing. So they're starting to have these problems. And then, so at 5 and 7 years old, they mention they have problems. And then they are a third stage of problems is when they are between 11 and 13 years old, where they join gangs. And they start to be, and they join them, and they are the worst. They are the most aggressive of the gang. They would say, we have to kill somebody. And say, oh, I will do it. He will be the most aggressive. And, that could be related to the orbitofrontal, where you make decisions without the emotional part, and you also with the connections, the areas of the brain that produce emotions are not being regulated by the frontal lobe. So we said we have to do something, So we developed some programs so we can intervene at 3 years, and then 5 and 7 and 11. So it's interesting because from the economic point of view, James Hackman, who had the Nobel Prize in economics, showed that the rate of return in investment in human capital, when should we invest as a government, should be at the preschool years instead of when you are after school. And that makes sense because if you intervene very early, then you will have like people who left school, who have drug addictions, who doesn't try or doesn't get into drugs so often, or they don't have pregnancy very early. So that's what happened with, so we said, let's do a program where we intervene with the family, with the primary caregivers. And so we went to very high poverty, extreme poverty areas and work with them. It's not because there's going to be only bad people. There are bad people in very rich families. But in the extreme poverty areas, there's a lot of stress, there's not enough food, they will let schools, there's lots of problems. So we went to these high poverty areas and worked with the primary takers. Usually, we invite everybody, but the primary takers usually are the grandmother and the mother. The father is really not present around. He has several women, and so we work with them. And what the program includes is that we wanted to change how they relate with their children. So we gave them a program where they can stimulate. We teach them how to stimulate language, perception, cognition, and especially an area that's called executive functions. The ability to plan and organize in sequence, the ability to have flexible cognition, and working memory. So we gave them activities so they can do that. And we also work with the mothers and the grandmothers. We work in a 2-hour, this is materials that they work 20 minutes a day, and we give them the material. And then we work with them once a week during 2.5, 3 hours in a program that lasts 25 sessions. So in these 25 sessions, we teach them parenting style, we teach them how to raise their children, because we went, it's a lot of games, it's not like a lecture. I asked them, how do you discipline your child? I said, doctor, I just put them on the floor. They will hand 2 big bricks, and they will stay like that until they learn. So we can tell them other ways to teach them how to behave. So we work with their self-esteem, and how to promote social, emotional, and physical growth. So we have evaluations, so people will believe that we are well. So we will know if this is changing. So we go and evaluate the children before we get into the program, and so it's interesting because the evaluation. So these are the things that we do for frontal cortex modulation, the working memory, the flexible cognitive flexibility, metacognition. We show them how to pay attention, and a lot of exercise. So we have a battery of tests that we develop to measure these areas of the frontal lobe. And it's interesting because how can you measure inhibition in small children? So we put, for example, this is an angel and this is a devil, and you have to do what the angel said and not what the devil said, and so we measure. So the angel will say, touch your nose, and the devil will say, touch your tummy. And we measure if they can inhibit the response. This is another test of inhibition. When we see the sun, you will say it's night, and when you see the moon, you will say it's the day. So we have a lot of measures like that. They are standardized according to the Mexican population, so we have a control. So we make all this testing. Also, we check their parenting style. When the parenting style you can be very dictatorship. You will say, oh, you have to do whatever I say, and that's it. Or you can have a very permissive style, and oh, I'm so nice, just do whatever you want, or you can be indifferent. And it has been shown that this parenting style, the dictatorship and the indifferent and permissive, will raise children who are not social responsible, who doesn't have who have a lot of problems. So how should you raise your child? You have to be authoritarian but democratic. There have to be rules, but you have to negotiate the rules with the child. So when we check the parent style, asking the parents in a big questionnaire, everybody said that they were like the Mother Teresa. They were so nice and so good. So we check the parenting style by the evaluation of the children. So these are the type of tests that we use. We said this little girl is throwing a stone, and this is a mother who's watching, and this is the mother who is not paying attention. This is a mother who is scolding, and this is a mother who is telling that he shouldn't do that. How's your mother? And they will point out the mother. So we have a parenting style scored by the children before we enter into the program. So it's interesting because we have found an important correlation between the type of parenting and the frontal functions. The parents who are like indifferent and very permissive will have a negative correlation with the development of these frontal structures. So we have all these measures before we go in, and then we go into the program, and this, we go in these areas where you have the dogs and the chickens, and where do they go to eat over there. And then we work with them with a program that is really very dynamic and with lots of games with the mothers, like this, for example. And after the 25 sessions, we give them diplomas, and we have a big thing, and we have the testimony of how did they do. But the interesting thing is that the theory that's been having is that the mother, the caregiver, if you work with a caregiver, with a primary caregiver, it's like first they are like an external brain in the first years. In this external brain will tell you how to behave, will give you tips of how you have to organize your brain, especially between self-regulation with the motor sensory coordination and sensory integration. And gradually the children will incorporate those measures. So this is one of the mother who we worked with, and she was really not well kept. She was depressed. She was like not really very much participating in the session. And look how nice it ends off when we finish the program. And we didn't tell her wash up because we're going to take a photograph. She will kind of, and she changed. And if you change the primary taker, you change the whole family. And you have a program that functions 24 hours, 7 days a week, instead of just like teaching the children. They are changing the whole environment. So we have these measures of how they're changing before and after. We follow them 1 year. We are following them 2 years already, and there are changes. There are changes in frontal functions in the children, and they're changing we are just published a paper about that. But, we have to follow them time to see what's going on. But I think that in general, when you think about poverty, people said, I don't have money. That's why I don't have resources. It's not heavy. But poverty is really more than that. It's not knowing. And that's the most important thing. And it's also like being helpless, not being able to do anything. And I just think that if you train the primary takers, if you can change really the future. And these are people where we work, those are children who are there who the future is to be, to get into drugs and to be the hitmen of this organized crime. And these are children that are part of that society. These are actual children. I didn't work with this yet, but I go into these areas where children who get into these programs, they get into, they're part of the social group, they identify with the social group. So education is like giving knowledge so that people will be empowered, and they will have power, and then they will have possession. So I think that's a different approach that we should do. So usually I think violence is not related only to poverty, but to income distribution. Whenever you have these different, where people have everything and people don't have anything, that's a big problem, and that generates a lot of violence. So we have to go through that. So when we talk about moral integrity, it's related not to one variable. How can we raise people who are honest, who are self-control, and who are compromised with society? Well, it depends on with the individual, and there are risk individuals, as we saw, but there's these risk factors are related to how the family is training them, and we have to give tools to the family so they can deal with these risk individuals. But it's also the school system. Sometimes maybe your child, you are raising him all right, and then he goes to the school, and the school system will say, oh, you should cheat, you should put like this. Well, so we can with the football game, you should give him a kick in the foot, So the school system has to be consistent before retraining. And then it's also the social media. The social media is really not helping because we're like passing in the news all these things about children who kill other children, and it's just terrible. And then we have, in society, we don't have leaders. We have like few leaders, like the politicians are the worst because they're stealing all the money, they're being corrupted. And we also don't have leaders in maybe the football players, that's why they're winning. Now they're the politicians, the football guys. So it's like moral integrity is related to a big effort of everybody. And we see when this is fading, that's a big problem. So in general, it's a very complex process. We have the genes and we have these histones that can get activated so you can express those genes. And these genes are very important because they generate the exact amount of neurotransmitter that you have to have so the brain will function right. And then you can have a different a brain organization that can process emotion positively. And these emotions have to do with how to relate each other. And the social media is also having an effect on the genes. So I think it's really a complex problem, but the way that we analyze it, we can do something. So muchas gracias.
It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Questions? Lots, yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. I have maybe two questions. First, I was very intrigued, how do you select the participants for the in terms of like information open invitations, you select them from the previous criminal background, or you do tests to say if they are like candidates for recruitment. And following on that, I was also very impressed when you were actually over recently have a big problem.
And reputation or social evaluation is not working. And I was wondering, what will be your prospects for social reputation between psychopaths and sociopaths, considering this factor you were mentioning about sociopathy being acquired, a big role of it being acquired. And finally, about your the last intervention.
I didn't ask the second one. Can you repeat the second one?
Sure. Between psychopaths and sociopaths, what will be your prospects for rehabilitation, personal rehabilitation between these two ones, particularly considering this element you said about sociopathy being acquired? And finally, the last program you presented, it seems to be quite convincing. And I'm thinking, if I was a policymaker, I would probably be very enthusiastic to try to implement some of these programs. But in the reality, you as a researcher, you that are conducting these intervention programs, what do you think are the main challenges for you that you have have so far these results to make them transcend into policy making? Thank you.
No, great questions. Great. It seems that I see that have very, very intelligent students here. So first, no, I don't. Well, I'm not by an accident in this field. They called me in 1994. So I will, if I wanted to evaluate Mario Aburto, who was the killer for Luis Donaldo Colosio. And why did they call me? Because they didn't have a clue of what to do with this guy. So I think that people from the FBI or somebody told me, do a neuropsych evaluation. And they said, what is that? So they said, well, this woman studied at Northwestern. Why don't you contact her? So they called me because the neuropsych evaluation told, they didn't know if he act by himself or he was part of a group. They wanted to know. That was a theory. So neuropsych evaluation can tell you if he's able to organize to do that. So they called me and I said, you want to go? And I said, I Judith Foster in the Silence of the Lambs. I didn't have the faintest idea what was going on. And I said, yes, I'm going. So I tried to evaluate, but he refused to talk to me. But they didn't say, we're bringing this woman, you know. They're saying, we are making this testing and you should do it. And he went on a strike, eating strike. So and, you know, when I saw him, I'm not sure he was the one who was, they were jealous, you know. I saw this guy who killed Colosio. They had this film who was like with a curly hair, back and all that. And they bring me this guy who was short, who had glasses, and I said, what's going on? He doesn't look like, oh, he became vegetarian. So, so while I was waiting, because he was on a food strike, I said, well, let me work with somebody else. So I worked with the Mochorejas, and I worked, and I was really on my field. And I said, bring in, so I trained other psychologists who were in jail, so we published a paper for that, and that's how I started. And then they, you know, I don't choose them, they choose me. So then it was Juana Barraza, and they said, they called me at the university, and they said, we have a serial killer in Mexico, and I know that you know something. It was Encinas, who was the governor of the city. And I said, of course, I go and I talk to you. So I went and gave him all my theories and all that. And so I started to be an advisor for them. He said, well, it sounds like a serial killer. It looks like a man. Usually it's not a woman. I didn't do the good advice, to tell you the truth. But when they catch her, they said, we have her. And we want you to come here. I was in a wedding dancing with my ex-husband. And I took the plane like that, you know? I said, okay, I'll go. So that's how and then I started to study her, and then the politician raised 10 points because of the things that they caught her and that they were studying her scientifically. So they were thrilled with all these things. And I talk a lot to the media, so that helped. Okay, so then I was there and I said, let me study other women. You know, I'm here, and I studied the narco-satánica and the navajas and all of those women. Keep with this title of gender. Usually, I don't like to work with women because all of them are saying they are innocent, they are virgins, all of them. And you know, the guy will go and say, "Oh yes, yes. Well, I'm innocent. I didn't kill that guy that I'm here in jail. I killed other 20. I didn't kill that." So I usually prefer these guys. So they choose me, and then I can tell you that now. They hired me to study the organized crime. So I was also thrilled, Judy Foster again. So I went to high security jails and I choose. And I published a paper about the organized crime. And it usually the organized crime, the neuropsychology of organized crime, because usually you cannot talk of, you have the guy who's director, the capo, but you also have the hitman, and then you have the one who protects, and the guy who loans with the money. So I make a profile of all of them, and I study lots of them. So I have very interesting friends. You should take care of me. And so, well, that's the story. I don't choose them, but when I go there, then I choose and I make this psychopath. I make these long interviews with her to see who's psychopath and who's sociopath, and I interview them and I make this questioning, and then I separate them. So that's the story. Second, you said about the difference between, it's very important in jails to have a good categorization. If you're a sociopath, you can be, the theory is that you can be rehabilitated because you feel the pain of others, and the psychopaths don't. Now I'm doing a study with the University of Chicago about psychopaths, and we really don't know exactly what's going on with psychopaths. The theory is that they don't feel pain, that's why they don't empathize. But you know, at the University of Chicago, they're doing these neuroimaging studies where people will they would say, see pain, and they don't react. But they said, okay, imagine they were feeling pain, and they will react in the function of their mind. So there's some hope that if you can raise these emotions. So it's,
okay. Another next question. One question.
Yeah, they're related questions. So I really enjoyed the talk because it was quite interdisciplinary. So you collected a wealth of data, physiological, cognitive, social, and so on. So I was wondering if you use the same markers for the non-violent criminals, can you tell them apart, can you predict which one is the psychopath and not the psychopath within the prison system? And a related question is does in any way correlate the impunity of the legal system with violence?
The second
Is there a correlation between impunity and violence? Is this across the different societies or different countries?
Well, I don't, but the second, I think it is. You know, it's like a social thing. It's impunity, and people get corrupted, and they don't have any consequences of what they're doing. So I think that that's what's happening. Like, there's no consequence of that. So I think. And the first one, what did you say?
So the first one is whether you can
Predict.
you can predict or sort of,
Well, we can classify them in jail, and we can see this is psychopath and this is sociopath with all these measures.
Can you predict which category they're in now?
No, I have to check them, and not prediction for these children. So, you know, it's just like if you think that if you have the genes and they will be turned on by the environment, then even if you have the gene, you have not. That's why we're doing this program. It's not good for you.
General background, so you can just ask one question, big test.
In regard to the rights, the politicians' sons, as in Mexico is happening now, do you think that they have the same behavior as parents that they just because my dad is the throne is Ostrosky, or my nephew is this, or what's happened when the nephew of the head beat the boss of the ISIL and nothing happens? That can be predicted just because of the rights of the kind of things.
Well, I don't just think that's a corruption system, and as long as there's no consequence of the behavior, that's like a clan that is taking up the resources, and they see through the politician way to pick up all the money, so they bring the family and all that. That's the
Question here, right in the middle.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much for a very approachable presentation. Yeah, my question is about the reflexivity about the role of the researcher when you're interviewing or when you are asking people. Do you sometimes think about how your status, being blonde, expert, wealthier than the people you are interviewing, may have an impact on the responses they are giving? Probably they are trying to show being too macho or too Juan maybe, or giving like a bravado history. I feel many more probably trying to be impressive. Do you think about those things?
Oh, well, I think that I will be a big team, and my team is not long. And usually what happens is that I do have empathy, so we really empathize. We're really good at what we do. Tell me all about it, and they are thrilled to tell us more about it. But it's not just like the telling. I have these objective measures. So yes, I think the way we interview is important. I just want to answer because the social policy impact of what you ask is very important. I've been working with lots of government people, and I went to Tepito because I went to the system and they said, okay, come to Tepito, and I went to the very, very hard part of Tepito, which is really dangerous. And what happens is they don't care, the policymakers, because they're not going to be here. Since in Mexico we don't have elections, they're not going to be there like in 12 years when we see the results of the programs. And they steal the money of the programs. I have the programs, and I was going to see Guatanejo, which is terrible what's happening there in Guerrero. And the guy who is now in the government still with the money that they were going to give me for this program. So it's just
It's the same in England, it's not just Mexico.
Hi. This is a question, I think it's something you mentioned about the jail system in Mexico. do you think is really effective in the way they, well, people goes there? I mean, apart from classification of the offenders, how do you think we can improve it in order to have like rehabilitation? And we as a society, how can we help in the process when they go out? Because sometimes they go out and then they come back again, and it's like a vicious cycle.
I think it's an important question. You know, I think the jail system, it has like maybe four core purposes or four objectives. First is just to isolate the individual who's dangerous. The other one is to deter, like people will not go because you will have 200 years of they will kill you, you will do it. No? The third, it would be like adaptation, which will be important. But usually what happens is the society really demands that they will be punished, and the first is punished. So we as society, in all places, we said, let's punish them, and just don't put them in my deter them from society. And we want that. We don't care what's going on in the jail. So what's going on in the jail is really corruption, is really violence. So that's why 60% of the people who are in the jail system will go back. The only place that is closing jails is like in Norway. You know, because they're so nice. I don't know what's happening. And it's not because they should be nice. And it's a different issue. Even the guy who was like a mass murderer, he wanted to kill these young people who were Christians and, recently, like 2 years ago, they gave him to the TV. He said, we're not going to give him death sentence. This is not So I think that society has to change. And society has to say, we have to put them to readapt them and to teach them skills and to do something. But society doesn't want it. And that's what's going on with us.
Hi, this is related with this topic. I remember one case this year that one boy in the north of Mexico was killed by other children. And I remember you did an interview. You talked about the topic and you say that it was the circumstances that they, with these similar behaviors, were together, and that's why it happened. And I wanted to know if it is possible to incorporate them in the society, because they are children. And
I know these children killing other children in Chihuahua, and it was terrible because they were to kill a little boy, 6-year-old, because they were playing to kidnap others. People play to be a police or to be a doctor, and now in Mexico they're playing to kidnap people, to be organized crime. So these children probably they were 1 or 2. They called me from Chihuahua and said, come and see them. But I have not arranged the things to go see them. But those were their terrible crimes because they don't have empathy. So that's the question that they were asking. How can you kill another child? It's just difficult because you are raised, you have this empathy measure, and children provoke empathy. And this is part of your biological system. So these children, they were 13 years old and they were killing at 6 years old. Just because we didn't know exactly the reason. So I had to do an evaluation of them, what's going on, to see if there's sociopathy, maybe the mother, the father, they live around the jail system. So we don't know enough to see. So you need to study them to see what's the chances.
Well, Mike,
Okay. My question is there a plan for implementing your programs in all Mexico, around the country? You have an agreement with the government, or you are trying to do something to implement it and made it at big scale?
Oh yes, I went to talk with the guy in Mexico. Everybody said, let's do work on prevention. So I went to start with the chief guy, Kampa, who was the head of the prevention programs. There's lots of millions of pesos. And I said, doesn't cost that much, so let me work. And doctor, this is wonderful, let's do it. But in Mexico, the guys, like I have a program in Querétaro, in Cihuatanejo, but the governments of the Cihuatanejo, of Guerrero, where we have lots of problems there, he stole the money because they're autonomous and they don't have to report that. So that's the problem that I'm having.
Just a quick thing. Because I am a political scientist, and what you have said actually have an echo in another kind of literature, like conflict resolution and peacekeeping. And we already know that you have to take 3 generations for a conflict to be over. So if it's our generation living this violent time in Mexico, we can expect like next 2 generations to have effects of it. And I was thinking about it when we were talking about the rats. Apparently, if you stress the rats, the next offspring is going to be affected as well, right? So the programs that you have, but that's a genetic modification. And maybe I didn't get that part because I'm not an expert, but I would like to know if it's a genetic modification we can expect to see on the next generations, in which case maybe we should, I don't know, instead of just putting people in jail, prevent them from having children, even if that's a violation of like human rights, or I don't know, like it's not obvious at all, right? But I don't know, like maybe we should be doing something to prevent it from reproducing as well.
No, I think it's very important. This way we have back to these programs. These people, you know, it's very interesting. You can have the gene modification, but you can the cortex will create measures so you inhibit that expression. So that's why the programs violence is not just related. Okay, they will be aggressive, but if you have a content environment and you train the mother how to train them, and instead of putting them in the floor and having to do bricks, and you see that different environment, you can change the future. So it switches off. Right, it switches off. I'm talking about the rats because they wrote to me when I told my parents, you should see it. Yes, you can change the future, but if you don't change it, we have children killing other children. Because, you know, the mother is not there, you have to train with the YouTube videos and all that. So you can change it. You don't have to kill them or
3 questions lined up. Not maybe, then no.
Hi. When you are doing your interviews, how do you disconnect with the fact that people are telling true stories about killing other people? So how you and your team or with them and listen? It's not only data, it's not only numbers. How do you disconnect emotionally with this?
Oh, it's difficult. It's difficult to do that. You know, usually when I went to the jail, I would go home and take all my clothes and clean myself and take a shower. It's just like draining. What happens is that when I'm interviewing them, it's just like, I want to know what's going on. It's just like the emotional part is more my intellect is there than emotional. Yes, but when I talk to people who torture others, I really cannot stand it. With pedophiles, I just hate it. So I don't work with them. My team works with them. It's hard, but it's a challenge.
Hi, thank you. For me, it's kind of a surprise that within all this program with the children, it pays too much attention to the mother, and I understand it. But then I think that it should also include the role of the father, because you know, within these families, maybe they live and reproduce this patriarchal system all the time, and the violence also comes from the father to the mother, then to the children. So maybe when you say the father is not always there, I understand maybe the reasons for sustaining the family and stuff, but I think that also should be considered, and if you address that somehow within these programs.
Oh, you are right. We asked them, please come. We'll teach you like stuff. We make these games and all that. They don't come. You know, at least in this area, they don't come. Because, so we have to change, like the mother will have to train the children not to be like the father. That's the issue, because we have a lot of violence in the families in Mexico, especially in the very low community areas. So yes, I asked them, I begged them to come, but I cannot do anything, so they don't come. They're like lying there.
Charlie says the rain should stop breathing rather than the wind.
How do you reconcile this approach that looks at the sort of determinants in the brain and genes towards violent behavior with the findings from psychology and other social sciences that show that even normal people, like the results of this model experiment, the Stanford Christian experiment, or the milligram experiments and well, the Holocaust as well, in which normal, average people can commit atrocities in given situations. So how do you reconcile the fact that you have a set of data that says that violence is ingrained in your brain and in your genes, and the other side, you also have normal people that can commit atrocities without having those characteristics?
Well, I reconcile because I said that violence is a very interactive part. So I do think that the social thing will inhibit the biological thing. And the studies of Zimbardo, who make this Christian thing, and they show that as long as one will say, "I'm not doing it," he will not. The other ones will not cross, and not even give the shot. The milligram experiments and all that. So I think that the social media could promote or could inhibit the development of these very high-risk individuals. That's how we reconcile. So that's why you have to do the preventive program and do some social intervention. But then sometimes some people will just act these terrible things in the brain, and then you have to decide the social. But the social has a lot of impact in the genes and the family. So it's like
Yeah, thank you. It's a very simple question. Have you noticed a difference between rural areas and urban areas, both in the expression of violence, but also in the possibility of repairing the social fabric? Because I know of some NGOs, for example, working in community, in indigenous communities, and they have like very different balances from other NGOs working in urban areas because of some kind of traditions that probably keep children a little bit more conscious about the social thing in indigenous communities. Obviously not in all of them, but have you noticed a difference in
Well, I don't work so much in those, but the sociological theories, they said that certain communities in rural areas where there's connection. The thing is that when people feel connected to the social environment, when you care about your neighbor, when you have a connection and you have empathy, in societies who are connected, the organized crime will not get into that. In societies who are really disconnected, the organized crime will get into that. So I think that if you are connected with your community, it's difficult to injure the other one. Because you feel that, he worked hard in the morning, he didn't, he has the same problem. But the problem with the urban communities is that we are really disconnected. We don't care about the other one. We need to get to work, we don't care. So we close our empathy to the other one. So I think that it's not rural or urban, it's connection between the members of society, the community.
One last question. Well,
Hi, I just would like to ask if, in your experience, there are countries in Latin America specifically that Mexico could follow like their policies with regards to crime dealing and policies.
I'm sorry, I got lost. Can you just summarize?
I'm just wondering if, in your experience, if Mexico could follow any examples from countries in Latin America to prevent crime or to deal with crime.
Mexico, an example?
Mexico can follow an example from other countries.
Oh, yes, they could. All these studies are not just inventing them. Other studies have implemented this, and they found that it worked. That in the US, they have done these programs and they work, that. But Mexico needs to want to do it. They don't want to. Because politicians will not have the results.
Continuing with the example, I just wanted to mention during this conversation, remember, I have a friend that she started this organization, it's called Pasamanos in Medellin, in Colombia. And she has this program, it's called like Héroes de la Calle. And what she does is like going to these rural areas in Medellin and talk with these like people that can be seen as an example in society. And she she promotes like the example for the little kids that live around. Like, I don't know, probably it's a guy that plays the guitar or something like that, and he teaches all the kids. And she, well, she and her organization, they do this kind of social activities where they can meet this person, things like that. So I'm not even a social scientist, so I don't know much about this, but I've seen her videos, I've seen her interviews there in Colombia, and I think she has been very successful, especially in that region of Medellin. So probably something like that.
I think it's a great idea, and Zimbabwe was the one who proposed that you have to have a hero. So people who identify with this value, and that's related to the moral integrity that I was talking. We need social leaders, so people say, I want to be like that. You know, people in Mexico say, I want to be like Chapo, like the Chapo. Instead of saying, I want to be like Bill Gates, or I want to be like children, I want to be scientists. You know, even like the money that you pay for teachers or scientists, how much do the football players gain, or the Luis Miguel, the cantante, you know? And we are, you know, so society is sending this message that's wrong. You know, you should pay good salaries and value these big figures, and so people can identify. And people are not claiming to be the ordinary science. That's good. So this is great.
I think we've had an incredibly good session. Thank you for all your questions.
Thank you very much to our chancellor. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing this session. And we now have free lunch at the North Cloisters, so you can, all of you now know where the cloisters are, so you can, it's the same place as yesterday, so you just go to the North Cloisters for lunch. And we should meet here at 2:15 for the last keynote on politics.